My name is Claire Hollis. I am 33 years old, and the night before Easter, my father stood in the middle of his kitchen and screamed, "Serve your brother's 29 guests tomorrow." He said it like I was not his daughter, like I was a hired hand who had forgotten her shift. My brother Derek stood behind him in a new blue shirt, arms folded, smiling with that easy confidence of a man who had never once cleaned a roasting pan in his life. He had invited his girlfriend, her parents, half a dozen insurance people, 2 country club friends, and a few local investors he wanted to impress. 29 people in total, 29 plates, 29 glasses, 29 chances for him to look like a responsible family man while I disappeared behind the stove. My mother, Mavis, stood by the sink with a dish towel in her hands. Her fingers were swollen from arthritis, but she was already reaching for the good serving platters. That was what broke something in me. Not my father's voice, not Derek's smirk. My mother's hands moving before anyone even asked. I looked at my father, then at my brother. "Okay," I said. Derek grinned like he had won. My father nodded once, satisfied. "That's better. A decent daughter doesn't embarrass her family." I did not argue. I did not cry. I helped my mother fold napkins, check the pantry, and let them believe Easter would happen the way it always had. But before dawn, every coffee urn, warming tray, chafing dish, and serving platter that belonged to my catering company was gone from their garage. The food order was canceled. A letter sat under the salt shaker. And when Derek's 29 guests walked in after church, the only thing waiting for them was an empty kitchen. Before the story begins, please subscribe to the channel to support me. I have a small question. If a poor person is scorned by the whole village, do you think that person should remain silent or stand up immediately? If you choose to remain silent and wait for the right opportunity, type 1. If you choose to resist immediately, type 2. Now, let's listen to this story. I found out later that my mother was the first one to notice. At 6:18 on Easter morning, while the rest of the house was still gray and quiet, Mavis came downstairs in her robe and slippers, tying the belt at her waist, with fingers that did not bend the way they used to. She always started early on holidays. Not because anyone thanked her for it, but because panic had become part of the tradition. By 7, the oven should have been preheating. By 7:30, the first pot of coffee should have been on. By 8, she should have been calling up the stairs for me to check the ham glaze, the quiche fillings, the fruit trays, the rolls. Instead, the kitchen was silent. She opened the refrigerator and stood there with one hand on the handle. No butcher paper, no foil pans, no cartons of eggs stacked in rows, no cream, no berries, no trays waiting to be finished. Just half a jar of mustard, a carton of orange juice, 3 eggs, and leftover chicken noodle soup in a plastic container with a blue lid. For a long moment, she did not move. Then she went to the garage. The corner where I kept the copper kettle equipment had been cleared down to the concrete. The shelves were bare. The hooks on the wall held nothing. The blue tape labels I had put on everything were still stuck to the metal rack, but the things they named were gone. My mother told me later that the emptiness looked louder than a mess would have. A mess meant work. Empty meant someone had made a decision. When she came back inside, she saw the envelope. I had left it under the salt shaker because my father reached for salt before he tasted anything. That habit used to seem harmless to me. By then, I understood it was the smallest version of who he was. He corrected first. He appreciated later, if at all. The envelope said, "Dad." My mother did not wake him right away. She read the letter standing barefoot on the kitchen tile, with the refrigerator still humming behind her, and the church bulletin from last Sunday curled on the counter. "Dad, I have served 126 family meals in 11 years. I will not serve the 127th. The equipment in the garage belongs to Copper Kettle Tables LLC. The Easter food order was placed under my business account, and I canceled it. I love this family, but love is not a work schedule. The kitchen is yours now, Claire." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along the same creases, because even then, even with Easter collapsing in her hands, my mother still believed things should be put back neatly. At 6:41, she woke my father. By 6:47, Franklin Hollis was in the kitchen in his undershirt, yanking open cabinet doors as if ham and quiche might appear if he looked angry enough. He opened the pantry. Flour, sugar, crackers, 2 cans of green beans. He opened the freezer and found 1 bag of peas and a frost-covered meatloaf from February. "Where is she?" he said. Mavis handed him the letter. He read it once. His face changed at cancelled. He read it again. His jaw tightened at LLC. Derek came in at 7:03, hair flattened on one side, phone already in his hand. "What's going on?" My father looked at him. "Your sister left." Derek blinked. "Left where?" No one answered, because the answer was sitting all around them. In the cold oven, in the empty garage, in the refrigerator light, in the silence where my work used to be. For the first time in years, the Hollis kitchen had no woman moving fast enough to save the men from what they had promised. And Easter was only 5 hours away. But that morning was not where the kitchen began. For me, it started 18 years earlier, on the Saturday before Easter, when I was 15 and my grandmother Etta taught me how to make hot cross buns. I remember the light first. Pale April sunlight came through the lace curtains and broke across the counter in little squares. I remember yeast blooming in warm milk, orange zest under my fingernails, cinnamon dust on the front of my t-shirt, and Grandma Etta, standing beside me, in her faded blue house dress, with her silver hair pinned up by 2 black clips. She did not rush. That was the thing about her. Everyone else in the Hollis house moved like they were trying to stay ahead of somebody's temper. Etta moved like time belonged to her. "Don't punish the dough," she told me, placing her hand over mine. "Bread knows when you're angry." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She showed me how to fold the dough inward, turn it, press with the heel of my palm, then let it rest. "Not everything good came from force," she said. "Some things needed warmth, patience, and a clean towel laid over them while they rose." My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea between both hands. For once, she was not peeling anything, washing anything, or checking the oven. She looked tired, not sick or old, just used up in a way I did not have words for yet. Grandma Etta had given her permission to sit down, without saying it out loud. Derek was 20 then. Old enough to drive, old enough to vote, old enough to bring his laundry upstairs and leave it beside the washing machine like an offering. He was in the den with the television on, shouting at a basketball game, and nobody called for him to carry a tray. Then my father came in. Franklin Hollis was 50, still wearing his post office jacket, still smelling faintly of cold air and aftershave. He looked at the flour on the counter, the trays waiting near the stove, and me standing there proud because I had shaped something with my own hands. He smiled. "Good," he said. "Now Easter won't fall apart when your mother gets tired." The room changed so quietly that I almost missed it. Grandma Etta's hand paused on mine. My mother lowered her eyes to the tea. Then, almost by reflex, she set the cup down and began to rise. Etta touched her wrist. "Sit, Mavis," she said softly. My father opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and left like he had said nothing important. But he had. That was the first time I understood a gift could be turned into a job before you even knew how to protect it. I thought I was learning a recipe. My father saw a replacement. From that Easter on, I was not just helping, I was being trained. And nobody called it that because in our family, unpaid work sounded nicer when they named it tradition. Training is a strange word when nobody admits there is a lesson. By the time I was old enough to leave home, I could time a holiday meal by sound. I knew the low knock of a pan that needed more butter. I knew the difference between onions softening and onions burning. I knew when my mother was about to say she was fine because she had gone too quiet. Those were useful skills, but they were not the only skills I had. My family just preferred the ones that kept them fed. I moved to Harrisburg at 23 and took a job at Street Bartholomew Community Hospital. I started at the front desk, answering phones, printing forms, learning how families sound when they are scared, and trying not to show it. 3 years later, I became a discharge coordinator. Most people do not know what that job means until they need one of us. It means finding a rehab bed for a man whose daughter lives 2 states away. It means explaining home health care to a wife who has been married 56 years and cannot imagine sleeping in a house without her husband in it. It means calling insurance companies, nursing facilities, oxygen suppliers, pharmacies, and grown children who suddenly realize their parents have gotten old while they were busy looking somewhere else. Nobody at the hospital cared whether I could glaze a ham. They cared that I could keep track of details when everyone else was overwhelmed. They cared that I could stay calm when a family argued in the hallway. They cared that I knew how to make a plan and get it done before 5 o'clock. That should have been enough to teach me. I was more than the Hollis kitchen. It almost was. I met Priya Desai at a church memorial luncheon where I had volunteered after work. The fellowship hall was full of casseroles, folding chairs, and people speaking softly into paper cups of coffee. The serving line kept backing up near the doorway, and without thinking, I moved the dessert table 6 feet to the left, shifted the coffee station closer to the wall, and opened a second line with nothing but plates, napkins, and common sense. Priya watched me do it from beside a stack of sympathy cards. "You've done this before," she said. I told her. More than I like to admit. She laughed, but not in a way that made me feel small. 2 months later, we started Copper Kettle Tables LLC with $4,200, 1 used commercial mixer, 6 chafing dishes, and a borrowed cargo van from Priya's cousin. We did not chase weddings or rich people's parties. We did church receptions, retirement brunches, funeral meals, recovery trays, senior center events. Food for people who needed comfort more than decoration. Priya handled contracts, scheduling, and clients. I handled menus, invoices, and the kitchen. We split everything down the middle. Every receipt, every deposit, every hard-earned dollar. For the first time in my life, cooking had boundaries. A start time, an end time, a price, a thank you that did not arrive as an afterthought. Because my apartment was too small, I stored some equipment in the locked corner of my parents' garage. Franklin called it catering junk. Derek called it party stuff. But I had receipts for every piece of it, and every receipt had the same name printed at the top, Copper Kettle Tables LLC. My family saw clutter. I saw proof. The proof did not matter to Derek. To him, Copper Kettle was something cute I did on weekends. The hospital was where I worked. The catering was where I helped out. He said it that way once at my mother's birthday dinner, like Priya and I were 2 church ladies arranging cookies instead of 2 women running payroll, taxes, insurance, and bookings out of a shared spreadsheet at midnight. 3 weeks before Easter, Derek started talking about Elise Carver. He had been seeing her for 4 months, which in Derek's world was practically an engagement. Elise was 36, divorced, sharp in a quiet way, with the kind of steady job Derek always pretended he had. She worked in insurance compliance for her father's agency. Her father, Conrad Carver, ran one of the oldest insurance agencies in Cumberland County. Her mother, Sylvia, wore simple pearl earrings and noticed everything. Derek did not want Elise to see our family. He wanted her to see a set. A clean house. A full table. A father at the head of it. A mother smiling near the coffee. A sister moving in and out of the kitchen so smoothly nobody had to wonder who made the food appear. He called me on a Tuesday night, while I was sorting discharge paperwork from a rehab facility that still had not returned my 3rd message. "Easter brunch is going to be bigger this year," he said. "How much bigger?" "Nothing crazy. Maybe 18. By Friday, it was 22. The following Monday, 25. By the time I stood in my parents' kitchen that Saturday night, it had become 29, because Derek's plans always grew in other people's hands. Then came the list. Elise did not eat pork. Sylvia preferred crustless quiche. Conrad liked ham with brown sugar glaze, which was funny considering his daughter did not eat it. 2 guests were low sodium. 1 was diabetic. 1 was vegan. Someone had a nut allergy. Derek added, at the bottom. Make it classy, not church basement food. I stared at that line for a long time. Church basement food had fed mourners after funerals. It had fed retired teachers at anniversary luncheons. It had fed widows who did not want to go home to a quiet house yet. But to Derek, the minute he needed to impress people with money, the food I made became something to apologize for. What are you contributing? I asked him. He leaned against the refrigerator and smiled. I'm bringing the right people into the house. My mother opened the pantry behind him, already reaching for flour. Her wrist trembled around the bag. Mom, I said, why can't Derek handle part of this? She did not look at me. Your brother gets overwhelmed. And there it was. His weakness was protected. My strength was assigned. That sentence stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. His weakness was protected. My strength was assigned. At first, I thought that only applied to the kitchen. Then, a few nights before Easter, after a late shift at the hospital, I sat in my apartment with my badge still clipped to my sweater and opened the Notes app on my phone. I did not do it to build a case. Not then. I just needed to see the shape of what I had been carrying, because after a while, invisible things start to feel imaginary. The first number was $16,900. That was the property tax bill from 2 years earlier. My father had called it a paperwork problem. He always made money sound smaller by giving it a boring name. The county notice had been folded and left under a stack of grocery coupons, but my mother found it and called me from the laundry room in a whisper. Franklin said he had it handled. Franklin did not have it handled. I paid it with a personal credit line and money I had been saving for Copper Kettle, and for 6 months I told Priya the business was just tight. The second number was $9,750. That was the heating system in January. I remember that one because my mother called me close to midnight, her voice thin, saying she was wearing her winter coat in the living room. My father said a repairman would come when he could. Derek was in the garage apartment with a space heater and 2 blankets, texting everyone about how brutal the cold was. I wrote the check the next morning before my shift at the hospital. My father said, "We'll square up." He never said when. The third number was $14,600. The old utility line beneath the garage apartment failed during a spring rainstorm. Water came up through the floor and soaked the drywall around Derek's place. Derek posted a picture of his wet sneakers and wrote, "Rough week." My mother cried because the smell was getting into the walls. My father called 3 contractors and argued with all of them. I picked the one who could come fastest and paid the deposit before anyone else finished complaining. $16,900, $9,750, $14,600. I typed the total slowly. $41,250. That number sat on my screen, plain and quiet, like it had been waiting for me to look at it directly. It did not include groceries. It did not include gas. It did not include the nights I drove home after midnight with my hair smelling like fryer oil and lemon soap. It did not include the holidays, the birthdays, the funeral meals, the hours I spent making my father's house look generous. And still, when people at church asked how my parents were managing, Derek would clap a hand on my father's shoulder and say, "We keep an eye on them." That was the part that made me put the phone down. I had been paying to keep a roof over a man who called me dramatic and a brother who called himself dependable because he lived close enough to take credit. The house did not stand because Derek watched it. It stood because I kept writing checks nobody mentioned. The checks nobody mentioned were still on my mind the night I heard Derek say what he had always believed. It was Saturday, late enough that the house had settled into its usual sounds. My father was asleep in the recliner, with the television washing blue light over his face. My mother was at the dining table, folding cloth napkins. She would not be thanked for ironing. I was in the kitchen with a pen in my hand, writing a grocery list I already knew would take hours to shop for and longer to cook. I had written ham, eggs, cream, berries, asparagus, coffee, rolls. Then I heard Derek's voice from the living room. He was on a video call with Elise. His tone was different with her, softer, more polished. the voice of a man trying to look like somebody's future. "No, it's handled," he said. "Claire's got it." A pause. Elise said something I could not make out. Derek laughed. "Trust me, she loves this stuff." I stopped writing. He kept going, comfortable, careless, completely sure of himself. "She's basically built-in staff. She gets weird if she isn't useful." The pen did not fall from my hand. I did not gasp. I did not walk into the living room and demand he repeat it. I stood there under the yellow stove light, staring at the grocery list while the words moved through me slowly, like cold water filling a room. Built-in staff. Not sister. Not partner in the family. Not the person who had paid bills, fixed emergencies, arranged meals, driven back and forth, until my body felt borrowed. Staff. And not even hired staff. Built-in. Like the cabinets. Like the pantry shelves. Like the old oven that ran hot on the left side but still worked if you knew how to turn the pan. That was what hurt most. He had not said it to wound me. He had said it because, in his mind, it was simply true. I looked toward my mother. She was smoothing one napkin, then another, pressing the creases flat with the side of her hand. She had heard him too. I knew she had. Her shoulders changed, just slightly. Then she kept folding. That was the moment something in me finished. I tore the grocery list in half. Then in half again. I placed the pieces in the trash beneath the sink and washed my hands slowly, though there was nothing on them. Upstairs, in the guest room, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Harborview Senior Living contract for Easter brunch. 54 residents and families. Paid invoice. Confirmed staff. Clear start time. Clear end time. Same work. Different world. I texted Priya. "Can you cover Harborview if I handle setup?" She called 10 seconds later. What happened? I looked at the closed bedroom door, at the house waiting below me, at the kitchen that had mistaken my silence for permission. "I'm closing a kitchen," I said. Priya was quiet for a breath. Then she said, "Finally." After Priya hung up, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, with my laptop still open, and listened to the house below me. The television murmured through the floorboards. My father snored once, loud enough to make the pipes seem to answer. Somewhere in the kitchen, a drawer opened and closed. My mother, probably putting away the napkins, probably pretending she had not heard what Derek said. That was her gift, and her curse. She could survive almost anything by making it smaller. I was reaching for my overnight bag when my father called from downstairs. "Claire, before you go to bed, bring up your grandmother's serving platters from the basement. The big ones. We'll need them tomorrow." Vey. I stood there for a second, letting the word pass through me without landing. Then I went downstairs. The basement smelled like dust, laundry soap, and old cardboard. The single bulb near the steps threw a weak circle of light over boxes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Christmas wreaths, winter coats, Derek school, tax papers, Etta kitchen. The platters were stacked behind an old folding screen, wrapped in yellowing newspaper. I pulled them out one by one, heavy white ceramic with tiny blue flowers around the rim. Behind them sat a red tin box I had never noticed before. The paint was chipped at the corners. The lid was dented. Across the top, in black marker faded almost brown, someone had written, "Etta supper cards." I should have left it there. I had a plane of decisions already moving through me, and I did not need one more reason to leave. But I opened it. Inside were recipe cards, hundreds of them, packed tight and soft at the edges from years of handling. At first, I thought they were just recipes: ham glaze, lemon cake, potato rolls, funeral chicken. Then I turned one over. Easter, 1,988, 27 guests. Started 4:15 a.m. Franklin watched basketball. Mavis washed. No one stayed to clean. I pulled out another. Thanksgiving 1,997, 34 guests. "Too much salt," Franklin said. Derek left early. Mavis helped until her back hurt. Another. Christmas 2003. 19 guests. Pie praised. No one asked who paid. I sat down on the basement floor with the box in my lap. My grandmother had counted everything. Not just ingredients. Not just oven temperatures. She had counted the guests, the hours, the cost, the help, the absence of help. She had written down what the family forgot on purpose. Near the back was one card newer than the rest, the ink shakier. Easter, 2009. 31 guests. Started 4:40 a.m. Mavis cried in pantry. Franklin watched golf. Derek broke serving spoon and left before dishes. At the bottom, beneath a line drawn hard enough to scar the paper, my grandmother had written, 221 dinners. They remembered the pie, never the woman. I pressed my thumb against those words. For years, I had thought the ache in that kitchen belonged to me alone. But there it was, written in my grandmother's hand. Not bitterness, not drama. A record. I carried the platters upstairs. Then I went back down and took the red tin box with me. I did not sleep after that. The red tin box sat on the guest room dresser, dull under the little lamp, looking too small to hold 3 generations of silence. I kept seeing my grandmother's handwriting. Franklin watched golf. No one stayed to clean. They remembered the pie, never the woman. At 3:50, 2 inches the morning, I stopped pretending rest was possible. I opened my laptop and logged into the Brenner's Market wholesale account. The Easter order was still there, waiting under Copper Kettle Tables LLC. 2 spiral hams, 5 dozen eggs, asparagus, berries, cream, coffee, rolls, enough food to make my brother look generous in front of people he wanted something from. My finger hovered over cancel for maybe 3 seconds. Then I clicked it. The confirmation email came through at 3:57. Deposit refund within 48 hours. Clean. Simple. Almost too small for how large it felt. Next, I texted Priya. Garage code is 0419. Take everything labeled CKT. Coffee urns, chafing dishes, insulated carriers, linens, mixer, warming trays. All of it. She replied less than a minute later. On my way. No questions. That was why I loved her. I printed the receipts from my email because I knew my father. By noon, he would stop being confused and start being angry. By 1, he would call things his that had never belonged to him. So I stacked the receipts beside my laptop, clipped them together, and slid them into my bag with the red tin box. Then I wrote the letter. Not the letter I wanted to write. That one would have been long. It would have had every Easter, every Thanksgiving, every check, every time my mother looked down instead of speaking. But long letters give people room to argue with the parts they prefer. So I wrote facts. Dad, I have served 126 family meals in 11 years. I will not serve the 127th. The food order was placed under my business account, and I canceled it. The equipment belongs to Copper Kettle Tables LLC. I love this family, but love is not a work schedule. The kitchen is yours now, Claire. I left it under the salt shaker. At 4:38, Priya's van rolled quietly into the driveway. I met her in the garage without turning on the overhead light. We loaded in silence at first. Then she touched the red mark on my wrist from carrying the platters. You sure? She whispered. I looked back at the house. No, I said, but I'm finished. By 5:12, the garage shelves were bare. At 5:20, I carried my bag to the car. Before leaving, I stood in the kitchen doorway one last time. The stove light glowed amber over the counters where Etta had rolled dough, where Mavis had endured, where I had mistaken being needed for being loved. I turned the light off. Then I walked out. By the time the first church bells rang in Mechanicsburg, I was 30 miles away, unloading trays at Harborview Senior Living with Priya beside me, and 2 hired servers setting linens on a long buffet table. The dining room smelled like coffee, orange glaze, and fresh bread. A woman in a lavender cardigan rolled past us in her wheelchair and said, "Well, doesn't this look like somebody cared?" I had to turn away for a second. Back at my parents' house, Care had been replaced by panic. Derek made 3 trips before noon. Brenner's Market had no bulk ham left, no bakery rolls, no catering trays, no quiche, and no patience for a man asking for Easter brunch for 29 people on Easter morning. He came back with 7 rotisserie chickens, 5 tubs of potato salad, 2 carrot cakes in plastic domes, dinner rolls in torn bags, and paper plates printed with pale lilies. Franklin called it good enough, in the voice of a man who knew it was not. By 12:05, guests began arriving from church. Elise came first in a soft green dress, carrying flowers. Her father, Conrad, wore a navy suit and the expression of a man who noticed details for a living. Sylvia stepped in behind him, pearls at her ears, eyes moving once across the room. No tablecloth. No coffee urn. No smell of ham or butter or cinnamon. Just foil pans, grocery store labels half peeled from plastic lids, and Derek standing near the counter with a carving knife he held like it might accuse him. "Little change of plans," he said. Elise looked past him toward the kitchen. "Where's Claire?" Before Derek could answer, my father stepped in. "Hospital emergency," Franklin said. "You know healthcare, they call, she runs." It was almost clever, almost believable. He used the part of my life that served strangers to explain why I was not there serving him. People nodded because nobody wants to question a hospital emergency on Easter Sunday. Mrs. Orlean Pike patted my mother's arm and said, "Poor Claire, always helping someone." My mother did not answer. At 12:47, Harborview posted the photo. I did not see it happen. I was refilling coffee for a table of residents when someone from the activities office snapped a picture of the buffet. In the photo, I was standing behind the serving line in my black copper kettle apron, holding a tray of hot cross buns. Behind me, families were smiling. The caption read, "Thank you Copper Kettle Tables, for making Easter feel like home." Sylvia saw it first. She had been sitting on the sofa, balancing a paper plate on her knee. She looked at her phone, then at the food table, then at Derek. "Elise," she said quietly. Elise read the screen. Her face changed. "I thought she had a hospital emergency." Derek opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. Conrad leaned over and read the caption out loud, slowly, the way a man reads the fine print before signing away his trust. Franklin's face went red. "She's being dramatic," he said. That was when Aunt Verity set her coffee cup down on the side table. Not hard, just precisely enough for the sound to cut through the room. "Franklin," she said. Every guest turned. "Stop." Verity did not raise her voice. That was what made the room listen. She stood from the armchair near the window, smoothing the front of her navy Easter dress as if she were about to read a church announcement. My father looked at her with that old warning in his face, the one that had worked on my mother for 40 years and on me for most of my life. It had never worked on Verity. "This is not the time," Franklin said. Verity reached into her purse. "No," she said. "This is exactly the time." She took out a folded photocopy and laid it on the coffee table between the carrot cake and a stack of unused napkins. It was one of Grandma Etta's supper cards, the last one. Easter 2009, 31 guests, started at 4:40 a.m. Mavis cried in pantry. Franklin watched golf. Derek broke serving spoon and left before dishes. Sylvia Carver leaned forward. Conrad took off his glasses, wiped them once, and put them back on. Verity tapped the bottom of the card. 221 dinners, she said. That is what my mother counted before she died. 221 times she fed this family while men sat in chairs and called it tradition. My father's neck reddened. Verity. She ignored him. Claire counted too. 126 family meals in 11 years. Easter, Thanksgiving, funerals, birthdays, church Sundays, last-minute company. And tomorrow, Franklin was ready to make her 127. Derek shifted near the counter. I didn't know she was keeping score. Verity looked at him. That is because you never had to. The room went still in a different way then. Not embarrassed. Listening. Verity took out 3 more papers. Back property taxes. $16,900. Claire paid it. Heating system, $9,750. Claire paid it. Plumbing under the garage apartment, $14,600. Claire paid that too. Conrad turned toward Derek. The garage apartment where you live? Derek's mouth opened, then closed. My father stepped forward. Those were family arrangements. Verity's eyes stayed on him. A family arrangement where one daughter pays, one son benefits, and one father tells the daughter not to embarrass him. Mavis was sitting at the kitchen table with my letter folded in both hands. For the first time, she lifted her head. She was tired, Franklin, my mother said. It was not loud. It was barely more than a breath. But everyone heard it. Elise looked at Derek, then at the paper plates, then back at the photo of me in my copper kettle apron. I need to know, she said slowly, whether you wanted a partner or staff. No one answered. And for once, silence did not protect them. It exposed them. I did not hear any of that in real time. At Harborview, Easter kept moving forward. Coffee cups emptied, plates were cleared. Someone asked for extra rolls. A man named Mr. Whitaker told me the ham reminded him of his late wife's kitchen, then apologized for getting emotional. I told him he did not have to apologize for remembering someone. Near the end of service, a woman in a pale yellow sweater reached for my hand. Her name was Marlene. 82, sharp eyes, wedding ring loose on her finger. Honey, she said, this tastes like somebody remembered us. That was the sentence that almost broke me. Not my father yelling, not Derek calling me staff, not even my grandmother's cards. That one sentence, from a woman who owed me nothing, gave a name to the thing I had been trying to do my whole life. I had been remembering people. I had just been doing it in a house where no one remembered me back. The fallout came later, in pieces. Elise did not leave Derek at the table, but she did not stay for dessert either. Conrad Carver never invested in Lake Marbury condos. Sylvia sent my mother a handwritten note 3 days later. I never saw it, but Mavis told me it said, "Your daughter knows the value of care. I hope your son learns it. Mrs. Orlean Pike mentioned the Easter brunch at the church women's circle, and by the following Sunday, half the town knew the Hollis family tradition had collapsed into paper plates and store-bought carrot cake. Priya got 2 new bookings from Harborview and 1 from a widow's luncheon. She called me laughing. You walked out of 1 kitchen, she said, and 3 people asked what your work costs. Franklin did not call. I did not expect him to. Mavis waited 8 days. Then she asked to meet me at a diner outside Harrisburg, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted older than the waitress. She looked smaller when she walked in. Not weaker. Just less hidden. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $1,500. Derek, she said. It is not enough. No, I said. It is not. But it is a start. I looked at the check, then at my mother's hands wrapped around her mug. I should have protected you from that kitchen, she said. For a long moment, I did not comfort her. I let the truth sit between us. I know, Mom. That was all. The red tin box stays in my apartment now. On a blank card after Etta's last one, I wrote, Easter, age 33, 54 guests, paid invoice, help received. No one asked me to disappear. I still cook. I still serve. But I choose where my hands go now. A kitchen is not a prison. It only becomes one when people lock the door from the outside and call it tradition. The lesson in Claire's story is not just about food. It is about the quiet danger of being dependable in a place where people confuse your love with permission to use you. Many of us are taught that family means showing up. And that can be beautiful. Family should mean soup at the door when someone is sick, a ride when someone cannot drive, a hand on your shoulder when life gets too heavy. But family should not mean one person disappearing so everyone else can feel comfortable. Love is not supposed to erase the person giving it. Claire did not stop loving her family when she left that kitchen. She simply stopped letting love become a work schedule. That is a hard lesson, especially for people who were raised to believe that saying no makes them selfish. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not fight, not shout, not explain for the 100th time. Sometimes, the bravest thing is to quietly step away and let people experience the weight of what you carried for them. A healthy family notices effort before it disappears. A loving family says thank you before exhaustion turns into distance. And a real apology does not ask, "Why did you leave?" It asks, "How long did we make you feel alone while you were still standing right beside us?" Claire's empty kitchen was not revenge, it was a mirror. It showed Franklin, Derek, Mavis, and everyone in that room what had been hidden for years. The meals, the checks, the planning, the aching hands, the swallowed words, the woman behind the tradition. The deepest truth is this: being useful is not the same as being loved. If people only value you when you are serving, paying, fixing, carrying, or staying silent, then they do not love you fully. They love the comfort you provide. So protect your heart, protect your time, protect the parts of you that keep giving even when nobody claps. And remember, walking away from a role that is breaking you is not betrayal. Sometimes, it is the first honest step toward healing. If this story reminded you of yourself, or someone in your family who was never properly thanked, leave a comment below. Tell us what part hit you the hardest. Please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their labor, their love, and their life have value.